real short version of the first 300 years. How about that? That's good. The first settlers came into North Carolina overland from Virginia. The first permanent settlers. You know, there were settlers that attempted here before that, but the first permanent settlers in North Carolina came overland out of Virginia looking for new land for tobacco, believe it or not. Tobacco was the cash crop in Virginia, and they had poured the soils out because there were no fertilizers. It was all slashed and burned. So they came to North Carolina and looking for new land. The first settlers that came south of Albemarle Sound was in about 1700. The early settlers preferred to send new land. One reason was tobacco. The second thing was they didn't have to worry about drainage. And also a lot of that land had been farmed in places by Indians, and it was called Indian old fields. A lot of Indians had died off because of disease, and those lands were available or could be made available. And that's the land that they sought out. An awful lot of the towns in eastern North Carolina are built on the sites of former Indian villages. There was a grist mill built at what is now Roper shortly after 1700. And things moved along fairly quickly because Bath was established in 1705 as the first incorporated town in the state. Newbern was established by Swiss and German settlers about 1710. So things were moving pretty rapidly. And the land they sought out was land that was accessible by water because there were no roads. The area around Lake Mesquite was settled very early, soon after 1700, and they were farming the lake rim. That land was a little bit higher. It did have a good organic matter content, and it also was underlain by calcareous material so that it was productive for a very long time. For many years they didn't understand why, but that's what happened. And it's estimated that by 1839, some 32,000 acres were in cultivation around Lake Mesquite alone. Population moved across the state very rapidly from the early 1700s. You can see right here that in 1690, this is where all the white settlers, or the European settlers was in 1690, in this zone here. But by 1790, the entire state had basically been settled from a variety of places. It was a very rapid settlement of the state, and it put an awful lot of pressure on available land. Now, some people moved to the frontier looking for new land, and new lands were available. Now, the frontier in those days was south because the migration was down into Georgia and across into Mississippi, because if you went over the mountains, there were Indians over there, and that was not very good at the time. But they were looking, but others weren't willing to move, and they started to look at what was available locally. It was known that organic soils were being developed in Europe and in England, and so they began to look at the swamps. Now, this is a general soils map of eastern North Carolina. We have an awful lot of swampland. A lot of it has been drained. A very high percentage of our soils have drainage imposed on them. Hyde County, for example, is over 97% wet soils. And you go on down all the way to Martin County, it's 53% wet soils. So we exist on drainage, and drainage was essential to develop this land. The first land developed in deep organic soils in North Carolina was at Lake Phelps. The Josiah Collins and fellow investors out of Eatonton acquired rights to over 100,000 acres of land bordering Lake Phelps. They dug a canal from Lake Phelps to the Scuppernong River, completed in about 1788. In order to, originally the plan was to drain the lake and farm the lake bottom. But they saw that they had enough elevation, that they had water power and transportation, so they abandoned that and began to develop the land above on the north side of the lake. This is that canal. It's still in existence. As far as I know, it's the only man-made structure in North Carolina that is a county line, because it predates the formation of Washington County. So that's Somerset Canal, and it is the county line. This, of course, is Somerset Place, built in the 1830s. The house is still essentially original, so it's a very long-lived structure for this region. This is a picture of the lands north of the lake today. This land has been in cultivation, most of it, for over 230 years. That's a long time. They used to worry about land being abandoned here because of subsidence of organic matter. But our soils are underlain by good soil that can be farmed when the organic matter has been used up, essentially. And this is what the area looks like today. Because of the successes at Lake Mount Mesquite and at Lake Phelps, the state began to dig canals into the swamplands, and basically in the early 1800s, most of the 1830s. These are some of the canals that were put in. Of course, the canal at Lake Phelps was put in 1787-88, but then the new lake in 1843, Pungo, 1843, Lake Landing Canal, 1838, and other canals are in the area, some of them later on. But that was a pretty extensive endeavor. The only problem is they didn't have the peripheral drainage, and it really didn't work out. Plus, the Civil War came along and pretty much put an end to anybody's expansion needs. One thing that's interesting is that the Lake Landing Canal lowered the level of Lake Mount Mesquite by 3 feet. That was in 1838, and it has never been put back up to the original level. So the land around the lake used to be in the lake. After the Civil War, North Carolina was bankrupt, and interest turned in the swamplands to logging. This is a picture of a temporary narrow gauge railroad off New Land Road, not too far, probably within 10 miles of here, not far at all. Those were narrow gauge, they were temporary. But how many of you have found rail out there when you're clearing land? I know you have. It's out there. And a lot of the rail that got damaged, they just left it exactly where it was. This is an example of a engine used on that rail. Typical light locomotive. This was Roper Lumber Company. And you get some idea of the size. It's not much bigger than a pickup truck. See that man standing there? This thing is, you got pickup trucks bigger than that. Right out there in the parking lot right now. So they were not very big equipment. Roper Lumber Company was one of the largest companies that operated in the area. In 1907, they owned 600,000 acres. They had rights to 200,000 more. The town of Roper was renamed in honor of Roper Lumber Company. Norfolk and Southern Railroad bought them out in order to acquire their right-of-ways. This is a picture of the mill at Roper in 1907. They were sawmilling all the timber in the area. They were cutting pine, they were cutting cypress, they were cutting an awful lot of juniper, and they were also cutting gum and poplar. All that was going through that mill. There were other big companies also in the lumbering business. Richmond Cedar Works probably had more land at one time than Roper did, because they covered mainland Dare County and a good part of Terrell County. And they evolved into West Baco, and Joe can tell you all about West Baco. But beside Roper, there was the Wilkinson Brothers, and there were a lot of others. There are little towns around on the Sound that are named after towns in Pennsylvania because the lumber companies came in from those areas. When the timber was gone, it was gone. There was no reforestation. The land sat there and usually burned. And that's what you see here in the background is burned off logged land. Now, one of the big changes that took place that enabled development to happen was the State Drainage Act of 1909. They brought in big floating dredges, and this is one near Terracea a few years after that. In 1911, drainage districts covered some 700,000 acres. And by 1928, it's estimated that over 500,000 acres have been drained using drainage districts. Of course, there was still a lot of private drainage. There's still a lot of private drainage today. Owners of the cut-over forest land try to promote it through land sales. A lot of it was promoted in Europe, and a lot of people came over from Europe. There were people from the Netherlands, from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and those areas, all up and down the coast. But here in this area, Terracea is one example. and it came to be known as the land of tall corn. Now, with our hurricanes, we don't want corn like that. Here it is right there. You don't want to have corn that tall. If you want to grow corn that tall, you can get the seed and you can do it. And corn, as short as it is, for a purpose, for a reason. And so it won't blow down easily. And then in 1912, a research station was established on high organic soil in Winona. The land was donated by Norfolk and Southern Railroad. Wasn't very much land, just 100 acres or so. They later expanded, but it came to be called the land of the tall corn. This is an example of what that land looked like and how the work, what kind of work it took to develop it. They're out there trying to cut down a great big cypress tree, and they're cutting it down basically with an axe. How many of you have ever dug out a stump this big by yourself? We don't do it. There's a reason for that. We'll come back to that. I'm talking about the early years. This picture was taken near Winona about 1920, and this is a 2-row corn plant. That was state of the art. This is what was being done in other places. This is the way corn was planted on new ground. That is, by my count, that is a 13-row plant. They burned it, and in the ash, they went in with sharpened sticks and punched holes and planted corn seed. And then they came back and harvested it by hand, and they kept that up as long as they had to until they could get the wood out. But it could be a very long process. This is what the land looked like from Winona looking over toward Lake Phelps. And this picture was made in 1930, about 1930. It was published in the 1932 Washington County Soil Survey. Luckily, we don't see too much of that anymore. But that was deep organic. It had heavy stump load, heavy wood load, and it was really a monster to clear that kind of land. Steve, you remember what the estimate was on how much organic had been lost on that area out on North Slope? It was close to 6 feet.
It's going to be that.
Yeah, there was a study made, and they figured that since then, that about 6 feet of organic surface had been lost in that area. This is an aerial photograph of the old Blackland Test Farm right here. This block right here was the Blackland Test Farm. The picture was made in 1948. By that time, the research station had already been moved to where it is near where we are tonight. They gave up on it, folks. The organic soils were so hard to handle with insects, fire, and other things that they gave up and they moved it. But notice that most of the research station had been there since 1948. But look how much undeveloped land there is around it. Almost all of it's undeveloped. That's what it looks like now. Since then, technology has advanced. People have worked on the problems, and all that land has been developed and is in production. Very little land development activity happened between the First and Second World War. It was the Great Depression. There was a surplus of land because of the advent of tractors and so on. The amount of surplus land amounted to over 40 million acres because of changing over to tractors. Those were also the Dust Bowl years, and crop prices were extremely low. Prices had been good in the First World War, but they bottomed out, and that was partly because of the Depression. Well, after the Second World War, things took off. Interest turned again to clear the swampland. Some of the reasons were equipment advances. The dozer really came into its own in the Second World War. I know you've all heard about the Seabees. No telling how many dozers were manufactured to be used by the military. Some of them were surplus, but it brought the thoughts back that there was equipment that could be used. There are attractive crop prices that were driven by the Second World War, still in effect. There was available land, and there were returning servicemen. And so the time was right for another wave of development to take place, and that's where Joe Landino and Wade Hubers come in.
show some old movies. As Paul was talking about the cypress trees at Punzel Lake, I've got a newspaper article at home that describes the cypress forest there. Cypress trees 13 and a half feet in diameter across. You can imagine what that was like trying to clear it back in those days. These pictures are from 1958 until about 63.
It started?
Yeah. Of course, all this land had to be surveyed, to be drained and laid off. You don't realize what an undertaking it was, but all the land from Highway 45 up to Lake Phelps, what is refuge now, all those V ditches and canals were all surveyed by hand. A lot of the right-of-ways cut with bush hooks. It was very labor intensive. It was about, Lake Phelps had about 120 people working. It was very primitive compared to what we have today. But all the drainage, other than the Hyde Park Canal, that was put in, as Paul said, in the 1840s. Other than that, most all the drainage that is in up on the south end there was done since the mid-50s. You'll notice the stakes he's putting in. You don't need anything to drive into the ground. You just push it down. This was Colburn Road and at the junction of Colburn Road and Allen Canal. And most all of you have seen these aircraft carrier decks that are used for bridges. And we'll see just a little bit later, but that's where they put one of the first ones in. This is the first big drag line they got, that in 1959, it was the first one that came in that was big enough that it could not be hauled on the local way by itself. They had to take the boom off and the tracks off. Of course, they didn't have the low ones we have today, but it was a huge machine. And these pictures are cutting the right of way and digging the Newland Canal between Roper and Tyson Elevator. And so if you want to know why that road is the way it is, you'll see on the pictures, the spoil was dumped on top of stumps and wood and so on, and all that is rotting out now, and there was never a foundation built. But even a lot of those trees were all cut by hand because it was too wet to get a dozer in there to clear the right of way. They did progress from the axe that Paul was talking about. They did have a chainsaw. But it was just, you just can't imagine the amount of hand labor that went into it. Lake Phelps, to furnish the labor that they had, the 120 people, they had 3 buses running. One bus ran to Bellhaven to carry the help, one ran to the Terrace area over at White 6 at Acre Station, and the other one ran to Washington. They brought in 3 bus loads of labor every day. The drag lines, of course, had to work off of mats. It's not real clear on here, but he set on mats. The drag line would sink away if they weren't. Most of you probably know what mats are, but they're big boards or logs tied together. You take one section and you sit on it and dig until you get to it, and then you take it and swing it around behind you. You have 2 sections with you at all times, so you're never sitting on the dirt. on the end by the Newland Canal, where most of the big timber was, that was on the, most of the land that was cleared. Down on the south end, it was just scrub pine, but up on the north end, there was a lot of good timber. So there you can see what the road bed was made out of there. The only way to fix that road is not to repave it, but go in and fix the foundation. This land was all laid off by the ones that started Lake Phelps Farms. There was three fellows, Charlie Cleaves and Terry Keep, and can't think of the other one right now. But anyway, they had gone to Oxford. They were college buddies. They had started a company, and Terry Keep was the one who was the surveyor and did the. No, he was the one that did the financial books. Fred Gall was the one that did the survey. I can remember him coming down. He was an Englishman, had a monocle. This is just a process of digging the canal and then building the road bed. Hydraulics at that time were just coming into thing. You can see this dozer is still cable operated. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a cable operated dozer. But the first dozers were all cable operated, and then hydraulics came in, which made a big difference. And they never worked one tractor by itself because they would always get stuck. You always had at least two tractors working together. These dozers were before the time of the, what we call the low ground pressure dozers. They came, the manufacturers really started working on that portion of it, lengthening the tracks and widening them in the 59 to 60 is when they really started doing that. After they did enough of that, they finally got what they considered to be a road bed. Then they came along with the grader, did some more work to it. Trying to get a road. And anyway, that's the way all the roads in there were done. It was a long process, and that's why the roads back there, none of them have any foundation on them to speak of. Dirt was just piled on top of what was there.
And Wade, who took these movies?
Well, I'm very fortunate. My parents always had a movie camera with them. My dad and mother both took a lot of film. They knew what was happening was something very unusual. They always had a camera with them. The fellow who runs the motor grader, Lake Phelps, had 2 motor graders, and I don't know why, but both of the operators, one of this fellow running this one was named California, and the other one was named Alabama.
Yeah, we knew Alabama.
Some of y'all got big service trucks, but that was the service truck they had. This is building the first bridge that I was telling you about with the aircraft carrier decks. This was over on Colburn Road and Allen Road down on the south end. They bought, I'm not sure how many they had, but I know they hauled bridges, decking like that from that aircraft carrier out of Norfolk for at least 6 months. They had one truck hauling bridges. Anyway, this here is the first one that they put in. Everything that was done was trial and error, and a lot of it was error. But they eventually got it done, and that's one reason this organization was formed. Is they kept having problems. What one person would try would work, and they finally got together and decided they should share the successes and the failures to help one another. That was the founding of this organization. You can see here, it's much different than it was on Newland Road. There was no timber here, marketable of any kind. It was just scrub pine and bay bush. There was some doubt as to whether these bridges were strong enough to hold. That's why they were getting this first one in, and then they're going to test it out and see if it holds the dozer or not. But
Pretty good test.
yeah, the main outlets were all put in basically first, and then they started putting in the other canals and then the V ditches, and it was just a process all the way along. This is the former outfall down in Ponzer on highway. This is the bridge that crosses Highway 45. This is when that was dug. When they put in these big outlets, that really started to drain everything where other work could progress. That let the water get out. The backhoes, like I said, hydraulics were had really not taken over with things, and so most all the ditching was done with this type of machine, the Bantam. It was a cable machine. It was later before the hydraulic backhoes came along. You see the cable that's swinging there on the back end of that bucket. That's on there to swing his mats around behind him every time when he needs his mats moved. And the cable machines, some of y'all probably know that, but backhoe you send a fella out there to dig. But cable machine, you had to have 2 fellas. Because the cables always needed attention. You had the oiler with you. Every machine had 2 people. One to help take care of all the cables, had to be oiled and everything kept greased. And I don't know how many of you have ever run a cable machine. It's kind of a lost art. You can get in a lot of trouble in a hurry by letting the cables get loose. Hydraulic was just much easier. I've seen a machine like this that slid off the mats, and before they got it out, it had sunk so deep that you could just barely see the top of the cab at ground level. The land was soft, it is soft. This was clearing some of the land where there was just scrub pine. The KG blade was supposed to be the answer to everything. Of course, there are those trees. KG blade would hit it, and the ground was not hard enough to hold it. It would just knock it over anyway. It wouldn't cut it off because the ground wouldn't hold the tree. So there was a lot of trial in there in many, many, many ways. They push everything up into windrows. All the cuts were laid off 330 feet, unless they made a mistake on the survey, which happened occasionally. And push up a windrow in the middle. And then it was a matter of burning it hopefully at a time when the ground fire didn't get going too. Next step was to try to get it in shape to do something with it, to plow it. They used mainly offset disc with some bushing log on it. I don't know what, all of you know what that is. That's basically just a super heavy tandem disc. Discs at that time did not have wheels under them. It was all just full type. Couldn't lift them out of the ground. The dozers were a little too expensive to run, too slow and too heavy. They eventually went with something else that we'll see here in a minute, but the dozers just, at that time, were not the best choice for what they were doing. They had one tractor, when they were clearing the land a lot of times, they had one smaller tractor with a winch that just ran around pulling the other ones out. You were probably stuck about half as much as you were pushing. This is what they went to for the Michigan plowing that they did. That's a machine that came out of Canada that was used up in the snow country. It had rubber tracks on it. It was lighter. But I think everybody that drove one of those is probably deaf today because the engine was right beside the driver. It was a 653 GM diesel, and you know how noisy they are. You sit beside that thing all day, and you didn't have any hearing left. The first time over with the disc with all the bay bushes, it was hard at times to even see where you had been. But it took about 2 or 3 times, and then you started to get to where you could turn on black clear. There was just so much vegetation that had to be cut in that it took a lot of trips. But these machines were a lot cheaper to operate than a dozer and a lot lighter. They did not sink away like a dozer did. A lot less trouble with them. You can see there that it's pretty hard to tell where he'd been. I think if we had to do this today with the equipment they have, then most of them would give up. There you can see the first pass over.
Looked like you had all those steer back in.
Yeah. And then, of course, they would come and put the lime on. Lime was all hauled out of Plymouth in 6-wheel trucks, which I don't know how they ever moved that much lime with 6-wheel trucks, but they did. Another one of the Navajos had a lime body on it. They had tried the Army trucks before, the 6x6s, and they couldn't get over with that, so they went to this, and this was a way they could get over it with the lime right away, get the lime on it. Looks ready to plant, doesn't it?
No tear.
They put the lime on, they cut it a few more times, cut it, cut it, cut it.
Well, you have any idea what the pH was when they started?
Anywhere from probably 4.3 to 4.5, 4.6, depending on where they were. Some places even lower than that. It took a lot of lime. I know one spot where I could show you today, where there's been over 40 tons total of lime put on that spot. And the ones that are farming it now still need to put lime on. There's the second and third trip, and you're starting to get some dirt there that looks like dirt anyway. You see the flag on the machine there. They didn't have rotating beacons, but they had the next best thing. At this point, it was in 162, they had cleared approximately 12,000 acres, were farming approximately 6,500 acres. For those of you who farm 6,000 acres, can you imagine doing it with equipment like this? They did go to 4-row after a year or two, but that's the kind of equipment they had. That's just shows some of the struggles that they had trying to get it in with what they had. We can't imagine working with that kind of equipment and tackling something like that. The ones who started it, John, you were part of it. They had a vision, and they were persistent about trying to get there. And most of us are reaping the rewards of a lot of that hard work. Thank you.
I don't have any pictures. You are one, Joe. There you go. Get a picture of that hat right there. I read the book if you want to find out a little more history. What I thought I'd do, I was kind of told that Jeff was kind of told to kind of lighten up a little bit, you know, make it a little entertaining, and then give you a little inspiration at the end of my talk about the future. I've got 3 stories. I don't know what the time limit is. I haven't really been watching. But I think I'll start out with part of some of the problems that other folks had. You heard about people who come up here and fail. And I call this one, this was back in the West Waco days, this would be the Mississippi farmers. There's a little lesson here too. Sometimes you farmers get making a little money and you're really being very successful, you get cocky. And then you think you know all the answers. Well, this is a story about a couple of cocky Mississippi farmers. They came up here to Terrell Canning bought 8,000 acres of land. The land they bought was just south of Northwest Fork. It was cut in half by Southwest Fork. They stopped by the West Waco shop one day. We had some culverts out there in the yard. They wanted to power well, actually, they wanted to buy those 4-foot culverts. Because they were going to put them in Southwest Fork so they could get to the back part of their land. So while we were talking about that, they were so excited that they had bought this property and there was enough timber on it to pay for it. And I just kind of knocked some of the excitement out of their enthusiasm a little bit. Said you'll never harvest the first tree. They couldn't believe that. It was the deep peak, about 1 foot above sea level. You could jump up and down on this land, shake a tree 50 foot away. That didn't discourage them. What they were going to do was send both of them had a son, and they were going to send up. The 2 sons were coming up there to clear land and farm. And what they were planning on doing, so we got talking about land clearing. And we had just started clearing some land down there in Kilkenny. And I said, well, you know, why don't you go down to Kilkenny and look at what we're doing? And they said, well, we've been to Kilkenny, we've seen what you're doing, and we don't like that. That's not what we're going to do. The land we cleared, the way we cleared the 5,000 acres of land in Mississippi, is we put 2 D9 cat tractors out there with a big ship chain between them. We just drove them tractors across the land, pulled up all the trees. I said, well, another big disappointment. You're not going to be able to do that out here on this land. Anyway, they took the 2 culverts. We agreed to take 2 culverts. Actually, there was 4 of them. So they take them back there. There's a road right through the middle of the property. They took the culvert back to Southwest Fork. They pushed the culverts over into Southwest Fork, which at that point was probably 15, 20 feet deep. And it looked like there's no current there because it looked so placid, calm. Then they started hauling dirt back there. I don't know how many truckloads of dirt they hauled. Of course, every load they dumped in there just disappeared. So then they realized they're going to have to get a drag line and start digging for better drainage. So they started asking about drag lines, and I said, well, the normal around here, we would just use 16-foot mats for drag line operation. I said, well, you better be thinking at least 24. They said, well, somebody else said we need to go to 30-foot mats. I don't know what size mats that they eventually ended up with, but they bought a drag line, and they put it up in on this road, and they swung the mats over into the woods, took the drag line back, and they took the drag line out under the mats, and the drag line went down until the water was at the operators, over the operator's platform. They managed to get the drag line back up in the road, and they left. I never seen them again. And I never saw their sons. The sad part of the story was, I heard sometime later that one of them had committed suicide because of the 5,000 acres of land that they had cleared in Mississippi, they had put up for collateral to buy this 8,000 acres of land. Well, that's just what happened to some folks that come up here and didn't make a success out of it. Another story kind of ties in with the pictures that Wade showed. We're back in West Waco days, and Atlantic Farms ended up buying Clay Phelps Farms in about the middle of the 1960s. I don't know whether it was 1964, 1965, somewhere in there. And they brought in an amazing man, and I mean amazing man, by the name of Dick Spurlock, who farmed in 17 states and 2 foreign countries. That's what he told me himself. And then this is another little thing you got to be careful about. When you think you're doing someone a favor and it doesn't turn out to be a failure. I was working for the West Waco. Mr. Spurlock called and wanted to borrow a low boy trailer to move a drag line. We had a low boy that we used for our drag lines. So I told him that he could come and get it, and they did. They took it up to the Atlantic Farms compound. His son, Kent, loaded a crawler tractor on the back of the low boy with a KG blade on the gooseneck, right behind the cab. Now, Wade said something about a KG blade in soft ground don't cut down trees, but a KG blade is like got sharpened like a knife blade. So Kent and the operator, the crawler operator, get in the pickup truck, leave the compound, turn left on New Lane Road, heading for Road, in that direction. Wade's already told you about that road. Washington, Oregon. The trailer broke, fell down into the road, stopped the truck. It did not stop the tractor. The tractor rolled right straight into the cab, sliced the cab into two men in it. First vehicle to get on the scene was Mr. Spurlock and his wife coming back from Plymouth. When West Waco found out about the accident, I got a call from our division headquarters in South Carolina. He said, Joe, we want you to get up to talk to Mr. Spurlock immediately, and I want you to write a full report on what happened. Not only did I feel terrible about loaning Mr. Spurlock that low boy trailer, I dreaded going to see him. I did not know what I was going to say. The next day, I walked into Mr. Spurlock's office, and I really think he saw the fear in my eyes, because he said, the first thing he said before I could say anything, he said, Joe, you didn't have anything to do with this. He says, that crawler, KG blade should have been loaded to the rear. There was no chains on the tractor. And Kent, his son Kent, he said Kent was going too fast on that washboard road. Well, that still didn't make me feel any better, because I had something to do with two men dying. So every time that I see, even today, if I see a crawler tractor on a low boy tractor, a crawler on a low boy, I think of this accident. And back 40 years ago, I saw a lot of tractors and KG blades sitting on crawler low boys. About 5 years ago, my former supervisor, who was here at the time, he had left in 1973, and he had never been back. And he came back up to visit me and see what had gone on. So I was showing him around, and he was just amazed at what happened to the West Waco property that he was part of managing. While we were touring around, he said one of the things that he felt sorry about was loaning Mr. Spurlock that low boy trailer. So Mr. Spurlock had called my boss before he called me. So he had already had my boss's permission. Well, I felt a little better, but still not a good number. Another story, we all do dumb things. I'm sure there's a few people in here who have done some dumb things. Back about 40 years ago, burning wheat straw was one of the things that I was kind of like to do. I guess Donald, he's seen me do some of it. But this is a stupid mistake story. One of the things that stands out in my mind is that 40 years ago, the way we were burning wheat straw then is we just drive a pickup truck through the field, and you'd have somebody sit on a tailgate with a drip torch. course, in the back of the pickup truck would be 3 or 4 5-gallon cans of diesel and gas mixed that would be spilling in the back of the pickup truck, so you can see what kind of a fire hazard that would be. My son Mark, who was 13 years old at the time, he was the guy sitting on the back of the pickup truck on the tailgate, set the field on fire. We were going down one side of the field, setting it on fire. We turned, started back up the other side of the field, and hit a wet spot. Got stuck. Field was on fire, truck was stuck, and the fire was right at the tailgate of the truck. I hollered at Mark, and we started throwing everything we could out of the truck across the ditch into the next field. My coveralls and binoculars that I wrapped in the coveralls went in the ditch. And so I jumped down in the ditch, which was about maybe 15, 18 inches of water in the ditch. And I looked up under the truck and I could see that there wasn't very many flames under the truck. So I had these wet coveralls in my hand. I thought, well, I can jump up under the truck and wipe out the flames. And I did. I slipped and forced myself up under that truck and just wiped out the flames. This was a wet spot and there really wasn't a lot of wheat straw right there. Thank the good Lord. Well, I got the fire out underneath the truck, and then I couldn't move. I couldn't get out from under the truck. I'm serious now, I just was stuck. I hollered at Mark to go get help. My neighbor was in the next block over. It was across the canal, so Mark had to run down. It was about 1.5 miles. Here's a 13-year-old boy at the far end of the field. The father was in underneath the pickup truck, the field's on fire, and this 13-year-old boy is running about 1.5 miles to try to get help. And anyway, the fire burned up to the wet spot, and it turned out to be a bigger wet spot than I had originally thought, and it went out. So after the fire went out, I relaxed. And I don't know what happened, but anyway, I was able to get out from under the truck, so I was out from under the truck when Mark got back. Well, I can tell you this, Mark never liked burning wheat straw from that day forward. And he always wanted me to burn the wheat straw, but he didn't want to do it. Eventually, when he got a little older, he rigged up a burning rig out the back of an old 3-wheeler Honda that we had, and we always figured that if that thing got on fire, we'd just leave it, jump in the canal, and let her go. But that was a story. I don't forget something. And of course, there's a lot of burning wheat straw tragedy stories. Mark eventually talked me out of completely stop burning wheat straw. Because it is kind of dangerous, very dangerous. Now, we could go on and on. I mean, I've got even more stories to tell, but, you know, time's running out a little bit, so I'll switch over to kind of a little inspirational story to help you younger farmers here, because we still got the opportunity to make this Blacklands as good as it is. We can make it even better. To do this, you need the support of a lot of folks. You need your family, you need your fellow farmers, your accountant, your banker, North Carolina Research and Extension. So you got to have all of that. But do not forget the good Lord up above. One of my favorite prayers is what is called the American Indian Prayer. And it applies really to farmers. I'm just going to read this prayer to you and then to you this, to help you and give you one line. And of course, they didn't have a God, they had the Oh Great Spirit. And their prayer was, Oh Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, and whose breath gives life to the entire world. Hear me. I am small and weak. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me always walk in beauty and make my eyes always see the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things you have made. Make my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise so that I can learn all the lessons you have taught my people. Teach me the secrets you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Give me strength, not to be greater than my brother, but to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me always ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so when life fades as the fading sunset, make my spirit come to you without shame. That's American Indian prayer. So they believe in a higher power. The thing that we need to learn, the line that the farmer needs to remember is, teach me the secrets you have hidden in every leaf and rock. That's what we've been trying to do. That's where Steve Barnes comes in with that book we wrote. He was trying to discover the secrets that would unlock the potential of these soils. And there's still secrets that we have to unlock. And I think that we will unlock them. Who can grow 500 bushels of corn? Maybe Jeff Sparks can grow 500 corn. Maybe Harris Brew would be Jeff Sparks to do it. That's what we need. If you want more stories, we'll bring Steve Barnes up here. He can keep you here until 10 or 11 o'clock. That's enough.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Wade. I see Steve over there. Thank him as well. Let's give these guys a round of applause. And let's all remember that we do have some of the best soils in the world right here, and there is a lot to come, and the future is going to be really, really good. And with that, I hope everybody has a safe spring, and take care. Thank you for coming tonight.